Hi, I am Jessica Lewis with On Awakening, and welcome to the Better Boundaries Workshop, where we'll be breaking down the what, why, and how of establishing healthy boundaries. I feel like boundaries are first of all, they're very important for any healthy relationship, for the relationship you have with yourself and the relationship that you have with others. And we know that the relationship that we have with others is a direct reflection of the relationship that we have with ourselves as we see the inner world being reflected in the outer world. And I feel like there's a lot of talk about boundaries, but it just seems really obscure and ambiguous on the practicality, the practical steps of establishing healthy boundaries. So we are going to jump into the workshop using a whiteboard, keeping it old school because that is how I roll. So to break boundaries down into the what are boundaries? Why are boundaries so hard? Why are healthy boundaries not something that just comes naturally? And the how of establishing healthy boundaries. So, what are boundaries? Boundaries are parameters or protection for sustaining healthy relationships. Think of a fence for safety that is keeping the good in, not so much as keeping the bad out. So, boundaries are protection. So you're protecting something that you find worthy, worthy of protection. So if you are a shepherd, or just a normal person with dogs, and you put up a fence so that your dog doesn't get out because you love your dog, you think your dog is precious, you probably have a lot of worth and value assigned to your dog, to this thing that you love, and you want to protect it. So maybe there are certain things outside of that fence that could be harmful that you're trying to keep out, but for the most part, you're just trying to keep the good in. So thinking of boundaries of more of what is the most supportive to a healthy relationship. So what makes you feel safe? What makes you feel safe? What makes you feel supported? And what makes you feel heard? What are the things that make you feel safe and supported in a relationship and holding that as your boundary? So a boundary is something also that is very personal. This is personal to you, to what you will and will not do, to what you personally will and will not accept. And this has nothing to do with an ultimatum, holding someone else to an ultimatum. If you don't, then I will. If you don't treat me with respect, then I'm out of here. That's not a boundary, that's an ultimatum. So a boundary, a healthy boundary looks more like I feel most supported in this relationship when I am heard in our communication. If I don't feel heard, I'm going to take some space. I'm going to remove myself from this situation. I'm going to come back when feelings are not quite so activated and we can conversate on a regulated level where we can hear each other and actually be heard. So setting up a parameter for what feels the most safe and supportive for you to show up in relationship. And like I said, this protection is so much rooted in worth. So having a strong sense of self-worth is crucial for healthy boundaries. And so having the solid boundaries within yourself before you step into a relationship with someone else, because when you step into a relationship with someone else, you are converging the boundaries, you're converging those energetic fields. So you, you've got the other person, and then this area here, that's your relationship. So where these boundaries, where these people overlap, this is the relationship. So this is what you are co-creating together. You still are two separate people two separate sets of boundaries, two separate sets of values, but what is in the middle is what you are choosing to create with each other. So holding what you can control, a therapist talked to me about it in terms of hula hoops one time. So holding your hula hoop and standing up next to your partner or next to a family member or next to anyone that you're in relationship with, they're also holding their hula hoop. So where your hula hoops converge, where they cross over, that is the realm, that is the area of the relationship. So anything that is in their hula hoop is out of your control. That is not for you to dictate. That is not for you to worry about. That is not yours. So holding what is in your hula hoop, that is within your realm of control, and that is what you can choose to set boundaries around. That's why it's so important to establish a healthy, strong, unshakable sense of self-worth and self-value and self-esteem, loving yourself, finding yourself worthy enough to be protected, finding yourself worthy enough of owning and asking for the love and respect that you deserve in any relationship. So finding a balance and finding someone that can meet you on the same page of what you're trying to create in a relationship is very crucial to any healthy relationship, but you can't come into the situation with a lack of self-worth or a lack of boundaries, because then it's everything that the other person wants, which you probably have experienced. So not turning into a doormat, but holding your boundaries in more of a fence than a brick wall. So finding areas where the fence can be changed, you can find a compromise, and you can set the fence and then you find that the boundary is farther than you had thought. Maybe you feel safe extending the boundary farther. Just pick up the fence and move it. You don't have to tear down the wall every time. You don't have to rebuild the wall every time because it's more supportive. It's not a barricade of what cannot get in, or what cannot get out and what cannot get in. So what are boundaries? Boundaries are a tool of protection. They are parameters, protection to support healthy relationships, so strongly rooted in self-worth. So establishing a healthy sense of self-worth is crucial to healthy boundaries. And we'll get into more of that in the how after we talk about why maybe you don't have the strongest sense of self-worth. And so knowing that a lack of boundaries, so no boundaries, is rooted in little to no self-worth. And that self-worth, or the lack of self-worth, is rooted in disconnection. Disconnection with self, disconnection with your self-worth. And so that leads you to outsource your validation, outsource your worth, outsource your worthiness, outsource your acceptance to other people. And instead of finding that source of validation, that source of self-worth, that source of acceptance within you, which tends to lead to codependent tendencies in relationships, especially for recovering people pleasers, but in a lot of unhealthy relationship dynamics, a lack of boundaries leads to enmeshment and codependent behaviors. So to dig deeper into the why of codependency, codependency is rooted in disconnection, but it is a survival response. It is a survival mechanism to a trauma response. Just put survival. So codependency is rooted in survival from a trauma response at a young age of not having the emotional safety that you needed at the time. So the emotional safety to express your feelings, to express your true self, your true essence. You did not have that emotional safety, that emotional security at a young age. And so instead of having that strong sense of self-worth and self-validation, you outsourced that worth, that validation, that acceptance to someone else, typically your early childhood family environment and that family unit, to be a part of the group. So maybe you picked up people pleasing tendencies, you put on the mask, or you showed up, or you did certain things. Maybe you were an overachiever. And so you thought if you could do this thing or achieve this thing or reach this milestone, then that you would get the love and approval and acceptance of the group. So when you are an infant, your survival is completely dependent on your caregivers, on your early childhood family environment. And you need them for warmth, for food, for literal survival. And so you're biologically programmed to do whatever it takes to get those needs met. And if that means outsourcing your validation, or if that means quieting your needs, disconnecting from yourself in order to attempt to connect with other people, that's what you're going to do. And it works. You are alive. It got you here. You're here. Congratulations. The survival mechanisms worked. You're alive. The problem is when those patterns, those survival mechanisms become patterns ingrained in your subconscious, and then it turns into this whole identity that follows you into your adult life. And now you are no longer dependent on your early childhood family unit, but you are still subconsciously programs to repeat those same patterns of codependency in your relationships with coworkers, friends, family members, intimate partners in romantic relationships. That codependent pattern is going to continue to play out until that source of validation is shifted from external to internal. So shifting the source of validation from external to internal, which leads us to the how. But how do you do that? How do you shift your validation source from external to internal? How do you establish an unshakable sense of self-worth and cultivate the self-esteem that is needed for healthy boundaries? How does that happen? It happens through connection, because we know that codependency is rooted in disconnection. We know that lack of healthy boundaries is rooted in a lack of self-worth, which is rooted in disconnection. And so you establish, let's see, is that too light? That's pretty light. I'm not going to use that one. We're going to use this one. Through connection. So connection to self, that light's a little bright. Through connection to self and reconnecting to yourself, because that's the whole, that's the issue with finding these survival mechanisms that maybe get you what you need, get you what you want in the moment. They get your needs met, but it's costing you your connection with yourself. So then decades down the line, when you're ready to reconnect with yourself, you're ready to change these patterns of behaving and believing and relating to yourself and to others, you've got to reestablish the connection with yourself. And a really big part of that is increasing your emotional capacity to sit with and be with the feelings that were never felt, the feelings that have been suppressed and repressed for so long. So feeling your feelings is huge. And to be able to do that, you've got to establish the emotional safety that you did not have when you were a child. So the emotional safety and the emotional security that you were not provided as an infant, as a child, as a teenager. This could, this could happen at any point in your life, but that emotional safety and that emotional security is needed in order to feel your feelings. And we know that safety is cultivated by trust. You're not going to feel safe with someone that you don't trust. But how do you cultivate trust? You cultivate trust through connection. So through sustained connection and through time. It takes intentional time and presence to cultivate connection. And so if you have disconnected, if you've spent years, if you've spent decades disconnecting from yourself, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of trust in yourself. If you had a best friend when you were 5 years old and you did everything together and you told each other everything and you trusted this person with your life, you felt so safe with this person. And then they started to ignore you and they started to not want anything to do with you, and you didn't talk to them for 30 years. And then when you're 35, this friend that you haven't talked to in decades comes around and wants to be friends again, wants to enter into this relationship with you. Are you going to trust them right off the bat, or is it going to take a little bit of time to get to know this person again? It's the same thing with the connection with yourself. It's going to take time and it's going to take presence to reestablish that connection that was ruptured at potentially a very young age. At whatever age that disconnection happened, it's going to take time to reestablish that connection. And through sustained connection, then you can start to trust yourself again. And connecting into the trust and establishing that level of trust will cultivate the safety to feel your feelings. And nervous system regulation, I can't skip over that because nervous system regulation is crucial to regulating and restoring your nervous system back to a more manageable baseline, to where it's not in constant fight or flight, it's not in constant survival mode. You're able to regulate and increase your emotional capacity to feel the feelings and emotions that were repressed and suppressed for too long, and to heal. Because as cliche as it sounds, it is true that you've got to feel it to heal it. So in order to heal these wounds and heal the disconnection that has been sustained for so long, you've got to increase your emotional capacity to feel the feelings that have been suppressed and repressed for so long, clear them from your system so that you can heal. So establishing that connection with yourself is crucial to reestablishing the trust that was broken, the trust that was lost, and then ultimately cultivating the emotional safety that you need in order to sink into that unshakable self-worth and establish healthy boundaries. And we will also expand more on the how in the 3 weeks to Better Boundaries course that you can find in the link below. And it's 3 weeks of cultivating connection with yourself, of sinking into trusting yourself, to establishing a healthy sense of self-worth so that you can cultivate better boundaries, so you can learn that no is a complete sentence, and establish healthy boundaries in your relationships so that your relationships are healthy, more fulfilling, and ultimately filled with more fun and peace and joy, everything that comes in once you have cleared out all of the repressed and suppressed emotions. So, if you want to cultivate a deeper sense of self-worth and reconnect with yourself to establish that connection that was broken, join me for 3 weeks as we dive into daily teaching. There's daily lessons, daily practice through breath and body movement, cultivating the inner awareness, establishing the inner connection with yourself, and really finding sustainable routines, daily rituals to empower yourself, to sink into that self love, to sink into that radical self acceptance, and to establish that healthy sense of self worth so that you can sink into your boundaries and empower your inner badass, because your beauty, your worth, your magic is so needed in the world. The world needs to hear your voice, and the world needs your light. The world needs you to show up in the most supported, most empowered version of yourself. And establishing healthy boundaries cultivates healthy relationships, and the ripples extend farther than you know. So the more self-worth that you have, the more worth you're going to hold for other people. The more acceptance that you cultivate within yourself, the more acceptance you're going to have to extend to others. So the 3 week course is self-paced. It is all pre-recorded, and you can find it in the link below. And if you'd like to join, I will see you on the inside. Thank you so much for staying and joining the Better Boundaries mini workshop.